All right, do you remember that $1.3 trillion spending measure the president was referring to? And he said, I won't do this again. I don't like what you forced me into. Republicans, Democrats don't even think of doing this to me again. Well, now he's revisiting that and saying, you know what, I'm going to cut this turkey up right now. I want to revisit it, cut some spending out of it. I think that would be easier said than done, but I don't know the ropes down there. This guy does. Fox News Capitol Hill senior producer Chad Pergram. What's going on here, bud?
There's a term called rescissions. Rescissions means just that. You rescind already allocated spending. It basically is a spending cancellation. They don't do this very often, Neil, but in 1974 they passed the Budget Act, and there's a provision in the Budget Act where within a month and a half, 45 days, they can go back and take back some of that spending. Probably the biggest example of where they did this was in 1993, and the circumstances were very similar. President Clinton had gotten through Congress, his big economic stimulus plan, and then Democrats wanted to show that they were fiscally responsible, and so they moved a rescissions bill through the House. It did not go through the Senate. That's going to be the key here. This was a tough bill to put together, the big spending bill a couple of weeks ago. It was quite a narrow balance beam to get Democrats and Republicans on board. Now, President Trump obviously probably wants to cancel some of the spending that Democrats wanted. He needed Democrats to sign up for this bill in order to get it passed. So if it was such a narrow balance beam to walk just to get the bill passed, imagine what it's going to be like to get those spending cuts put together here. It has to go through the House Appropriations Committee. And, Neil, it's often said there are three types of members of Congress. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, and there are appropriators. They're in charge of spending the money. And Republicans on the Appropriations Committee, and Democrats for that matter, may be loath to go back and try to rescind some of this spending. They would need just 51 votes in the United States Senate. You would think that might be tough. But think about some of the Democrats, moderate fiscal conservatives, who are up for re-election this fall. Someone like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who you just mentioned, Joe Donnelly of Indiana. This might be good politics. But again, to get it through the House of Representatives, you could have conservatives there, members of the Freedom Caucus balk. They might want these spending cuts, but they might say it's not enough, and that's the problem there. So again, to get this bill just right is going to be very challenging. But again, if you have the president saying they want to do it, and you can get all the Republicans on board, they can probably do this without Democratic assistance, Neil.
Yeah, but like you said, easier said than done. Chad, thank you very much, my friend.
Anytime.
I knew you would know. All right, Chad Pergram, let's go to Arizona Republican Congressman Andy Biggs. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus. He voted against that spending measure. So I would imagine, sir, you welcome this latest development.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the rescissions look like. It's instituted by the White House. They initiate the action. So the president's going to have to make a list of unencumbered accounts that he wants to attack and pare back. I'm excited to see what that list looks like, and I hope it's as expansive as President Reagan was in the early 80s, because President Reagan rescinded about $45 billion over the course of his presidency.
Now, what happens with the other Republicans, though? I mean, they were just happy in the end, even though they didn't publicly say they'll wipe their hands of it and say, all right, we got this thing done and approved and we're out of here. Some of them might not be as happy. Well, I think that in the end, we want to get toward a balanced budget. So they may not be real happy that we're doing some paring and pruning afterwards, but this bush is overgrown and it's time to cut it back. And I think that many of them are going to say, here's a chance to go back, because I don't think our base was real happy with us. So here's a chance to go back and say, look, we heard you. We're going to cut back some spending. And I think that's a good thing. Switching gears, if you don't mind, sir, we're getting word from Nancy Pelosi in this, leaked out from conversations and strategies she is sharing with colleagues, that if the Democrats were to retake the House, she wants to revisit your tax cut, Republicans' tax, or the one that became law, and just, rip it apart. Says that it was all tilted to the rich. You say what?
I say, well, that's why we need to win the midterms for Republicans, because she's already talking about increasing the personal income tax and the corporate income tax. And this gets to my whole point all along is they just, Democrats, and many of them just fundamentally don't understand the economy. And the economy really moves and circulates and is stimulated when individuals keep their money, when corporations can keep their money and reinvest in their businesses and create jobs. And that's what we're seeing. We're having record revenue in the federal tax coffers because of the economy starting to really heat up. And that's,
all right, but you're
that's
also having record deficits. I'm not saying that's exclusively your fault, but the Republicans are going to be the stewards of what will likely be $1 trillion deficit this year. I'm not blaming that on the tax cuts. I'm not blaming that on anything but just more spending versus more money coming in. And so I guess what I'm asking you is what Republicans will counter with. If Democrats were to take over in the House, what would be your argument for keeping those cuts and trying to avoid deficits from getting worse?
Well, I think that the fact that the reduced regulation and the tax reform has produced record revenue every month coming into the federal government for about 6-7 months now, I think that's indicia that lower taxes actually increases federal revenue, and that's not intuitive. I realize that, but that's exactly what happens. We've seen it over and over again.
But you know what's happened. I know you were trying to address this, and some of your House Freedom Caucus members are trying to address this. This is why you were concerned about that $1.3 trillion spending plan, because a lot of American voters, as you know, Congressmen, are saying, well, Republicans talk a good game on this, but they don't rein in spending. And maybe Nancy Pelosi's right. You say what?
Well, I say that Americans may be right. The Republicans have got to cut spending. We have got to be tougher on that.
But you never do. You never do.
Well,
ever.
Yeah, but that may be true so far. I'm always an optimist. I believe
you're running out of so fars, right? Because November is not that far.
Yeah. Well, that's why the rescissions, I think, mean a lot. We can move some of that down. It's still going to be a deficit spending, but if you were going to say that the Democrats are going to bring a balanced budget, they're not going to. They're going to increase taxes, but they will reduce federal revenue. But in the meantime, they're going to continue to increase spending. Good grief, their spending proposal was a $10 trillion deficit over 10 years. That's
all right.
Yeah, it's horrible.
No, you raise a very good point. I mean, it's a little rich for Nancy Pelosi to come out and bemoan deficits and the rest, but it is what it is, right? It's a weird world.
Right.
Congressman, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Neil.
All right, in the meantime, the CDC is warning of a new bacteria, what they call a nightmare bacteria, in 27 states. And they're concerned enough to say, you got to watch out for this. And we're concerned enough, because they're concerned enough, to bring a top-flight doctor to help us out.